Silverwind Airport basked in the pale glow of morning light, but in a quiet corner of the arrivals hall, an old weathered figure sat silently, as if forgotten by time itself. Ethan Carter, a 29-year-old security guard, had just clocked in for his shift when he froze mid-step, catching a whisper from a coworker. "He's been here 4 days already, you know that?" A voice called out from the ticket counter. Ethan turned, and right then, the old man, who he'd later learn was named Henry Grayson, lifted his head from the cold metal chair, his misty blue eyes locked onto Ethan's. "Henry, you're one of the people here, right? Have you seen her? Isabella. She said she'd come today." Ethan: I'm not sure, sir. Who's Isabella? Have you been waiting for her long?" Henry: 4 days now, but I have to stay. She sent me a message. She needs me. I've waited for her 60 years, you understand? 60 years. Ethan: 60 years? Mr. Henry, I'll help you find her, but tell me the truth. Who is she, and why are you so sure she'll come? Henry: she's my love, from the war. I thought I'd lost her forever, but now she's back. You have to believe me. She's real. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding. 60 years of waiting, 4 days in an airport, a bouquet of dying roses. This story was beautiful and strange all at once, and he knew it wouldn't be simple. "Hey, you guys," Ethan said, turning as if speaking to an imaginary audience. "Do you believe in love that defies time? This old man's got me questioning everything. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. What do you think Isabella is all about, and is she even real? Stick with me to unravel this mystery, because I've got a feeling it's going to blow your mind." The morning light filtered through the massive glass panes of Silverwind Airport, painting the polished marble floors and rows of cold metal chairs in shades of gold. The steady rumble of rolling suitcases blended with the hum of flight announcements, a familiar soundtrack to Ethan Carter's 6 years on the job. He moved through the arrivals area, his dark blue uniform hugging his frame, his security boots clicking rhythmically against the floor. His work was usually straightforward: check IDs, guide passengers, maybe track down a lost bag or two. But today, day 4 since he first noticed Henry Grayson, everything felt different. Henry sat there, a solitary figure in the bustling hall, like a tiny island amid a sea of hurried travelers. He wore a cream-colored wool coat, meticulously tailored though rumpled from days of wear, and a pair of polished brown leather shoes dusted with a thin layer of grime. The bouquet of roses in his hands, the thing that first caught Ethan's eye, had withered into a sad cluster of drooping petals, a few scattering to the floor like crimson tears. His eyes never left the exit, a look of hope and longing etched into his face, as if he were waiting for a miracle to step out of the crowd. Ethan lingered a few feet away, watching, a shiver running down his spine, not from fear, but from an unshakable hunch that this old man carried a secret bigger than he could guess. Ethan thought back to the days before. Day 1, he'd only glimpsed Henry, assuming he was just another passenger waiting out a delayed flight. Day 2, he overheard the whispers. "He's not going anywhere, just sitting there with those flowers." By day 3, curiosity had turned to concern as he watched the roses fade and Henry's bright eyes grow weary. Yet the old man never left his seat. And now, day 4, the brief story Henry had just shared, about Isabella, 60 years of waiting, and a mysterious message, pulled Ethan in too deep to walk away. 4 days with no real food, no proper sleep, just sitting there with a wilted bouquet and a dusty travel pillow. This wasn't normal. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the floor, his mind buzzing with questions. Henry didn't look like the drifters who sometimes lingered in airports for shelter. He was too refined, too elegant, even if time and waiting had worn him down. Ethan paused in front of him, crouching to pick up a fallen petal, feeling its brittle dryness under his fingers. "You've been here 4 days," he said, his voice soft but laced with curiosity. "I'm Ethan, security here. Can I help you with anything?" Henry looked up, his pale blue eyes glinting with a flicker of recognition, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Thank you, young man," he rasped, his voice like wind rustling through old pages. "I'm Henry Grayson. I'm not a bother, just waiting for someone." Ethan slid into the chair across from him, keeping a respectful distance. "4 days is a long time, Mr. Henry," he said, glancing at the flowers. "That person must be pretty special, huh?" Henry nodded, his fingers brushing a wilted petal. "Very special," he whispered, his voice fading as if lost in memory. "I don't want to trouble anyone. I just need to be here when she arrives." Ethan's chest tightened. There was something in Henry's tone, raw honesty mixed with fragility, that he couldn't ignore. But 60 years? A message from where? Who was Isabella? The question swirled in his mind like a gathering storm. As Ethan stood to resume his patrol, Henry's image stuck with him. Henry Grayson wasn't just a passenger, he was a mystery, a story begging to be told. Ethan told himself it might just be a delayed flight, a simple mix-up. But deep down, a quiet unease took root. Who was he waiting for? And why was he so patient, despite the dying flowers and the relentless march of time? As the morning sun flooded the hall, Ethan knew this encounter wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was the start of a journey, one he couldn't turn back from, one that might change both him and this old man forever. The morning light at Silverwind Airport grew brighter, washing the rows of cold metal chairs in the arrivals area with a golden hue. Ethan Carter was halfway through his patrol, his security boots clicking steadily against the glossy marble floor, but his mind kept drifting back to the strange old man he'd seen at dawn. Henry Grayson, the name he'd just learned, still sat there, unmoving, like an ancient tree rooted amid the rush of travelers. The bouquet of roses in his hands looked even more pitiful now, petals scattering to the floor in sad red streaks beneath his chair. Ethan couldn't explain why, but that sight stirred a vague unease in him, as if Henry was guarding a secret he didn't even realize he held. He decided to go back. It wasn't his job, Henry wasn't breaking any airport rules, but a gut feeling told Ethan the old man needed someone to talk to, even just for a moment. As he approached, Henry looked up, his pale blue eyes glinting with a spark of recognition. "Back again, Ethan?" he said, his voice raspy yet warm, like a breeze rustling through old pages. Ethan smiled and settled into the chair across from him, keeping a respectful distance. "Yes, sir. Just checking on you. Waiting this long can't be easy." Henry gave a faint chuckle, a shy edge to it. He brushed the wilted roses with trembling fingers, grazing a dried petal. "I'm used to it," he replied, his voice softening. "Back in the day, I waited far longer than this. Once, I sat for 4 days in a tent in the snow, just hoping for a signal from my crew. Old stories now." Ethan tilted his head, intrigued. "You were a soldier?" Henry nodded, his gaze drifting to some distant past. "A pilot. World War II. I flew bombers, a job no one likes to remember, but I made it out. A lot of others didn't." Henry's words caught Ethan off guard. He'd pictured the old man as someone ordinary, maybe a sweet grandpa waiting for grandkids, but now he saw another layer. A man who'd faced war, who carried heavy memories on his shoulders. "Is that why you're so patient now?" Ethan asked, keeping his tone gentle to preserve the fragile air between them. Henry smiled faintly, though a shadow of sadness crossed his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe it's because I don't have much time left to wait anymore. Isabella's worth it, no matter how long." "Isabella," Ethan echoed, feeling the weight of the name in Henry's voice. "What makes her so special to you?" Henry hesitated, as if weighing whether to open up. Finally, he sighed, his hands tightening around the bouquet. She was my light, a long time ago. We met during the war in a little town in France. I was a young pilot. She was a nurse. I promised I'd come back for her when the war ended, with a bouquet of roses, her favorite. But I couldn't keep that promise. The war tore us apart, and I lost her for 60 years. Ethan listened, his chest tightening as the story sank in. He glanced at the roses in Henry's hands, not just a gift, but a symbol of an unfulfilled vow, a belated apology. "So now you think she's coming?" he asked, his voice hushed with emotion. Henry nodded, a fragile spark of hope lighting his eyes. "I found her online. Can you believe it? After all these years, I got a message from Isabella. She said she's living far away, but coming here to see me. I can't miss this chance, Ethan. It's my last shot." Ethan smiled, but a flicker of doubt began to glow inside him. A love story spanning decades sounded beautiful, but it was almost too incredible for today's world. He didn't want to question Henry. The old man was too sincere, too vulnerable, but he couldn't shake the thought that something was off. "Which flight is she on, Mr. Henry?" he asked, keeping his tone steady. Henry frowned, as if the question puzzled him. "Flight 499, I think. I'm not good with this tech stuff. Could you help me check when it lands?" Ethan nodded, rising and pointing toward the digital board at the end of the hall. "I don't have direct access to flight schedules, but you can see it up there. Everything's updated live." Henry followed Ethan's gesture, squinting at the bright display. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You're kind. I don't want to miss her. Isabella won't be happy if I'm not here when she walks out." Ethan nodded, struck by the sincerity in Henry's words, yet unable to shake the growing unease gnawing at him. As he stood to get back to work, Henry suddenly raised a hand, signaling him to wait. "You know, Ethan," he said, his voice trembling, "I've dreamed of this day for 60 years. I thought I'd take this regret to my grave, but now I've got a chance to make it right. Do you ever believe in miracles?" Ethan paused, drawn into the old man's gaze. I hope they're real, sir," he replied, his voice low. "I hope Isabella gets here soon. Call me if you need anything, okay?" Henry smiled, a warm, sun-through-clouds kind of smile. "Thank you, young man. You remind me of myself back then, full of heart and kindness." Ethan walked away, his steps heavier than before. That brief conversation left him tangled up, warmed by Henry's honesty, yet unsettled by his story. A war pilot, a 60-year promise, and now a reunion sparked online? It was cinematic, but fragile as the rose petals in Henry's hands. Glancing back one last time, he saw Henry still sitting there, eyes locked on the exit, the wilted bouquet pressed to his chest. Ethan didn't know it yet, but this moment was the spark of a chain of events beyond his wildest imagination. A tale not just of love, but of faith, pain, and the deepest secrets of the human soul. Silverwind Airport never stopped moving. As the morning sun gave way to a blazing golden sunset, the flow of people streamed through the gates like a relentless river. Ethan Carter was used to this rhythm, the clatter of suitcases rolling across the floor, the crackle of flight announcements over the speakers, and the mix of laughter and tears from fleeting reunions. But all day long, through every patrol loop, his eyes kept drifting back to Henry Grayson. The old man was still there, perched on that cold metal chair in the arrivals hall, the wilted rose bouquet resting silently in his lap, like a fading reminder of time slipping away. Ethan couldn't shake the image from his mind, and each time he saw Henry, an uneasy feeling stirred inside him. Not quite worry, but a hazy instinct that something was wrong. By the end of his afternoon shift, as the sun dipped below the giant glass windows, Ethan decided to swing by Henry's spot one last time before heading home. The arrivals hall had thinned out, leaving only a handful of stragglers dragging suitcases slowly toward the exit. Henry remained motionless, like a forgotten statue amid the rush of life. The roses were a crumpled mess now, a few petals littering the floor in stark red stains, like dried blood. The small travel pillow beside him was caked in dust, as if it had become a permanent fixture of the scene. Ethan paused a few steps away, watching. Henry's pale blue eyes stayed glued to the exit, but the bright hope Ethan had seen that morning had dimmed, replaced by a weary, aching longing. His shoulders slumped slightly, the cream wool coat creased at the sleeves, yet he held an astonishing calm. Ethan couldn't hold back any longer and stepped closer. "Mr. Henry," he called, his voice soft but clear enough to cut through the lingering airport noise. "You still okay? Isabella hasn't shown up yet." Henry looked up, his gaze flickering with a hint of confusion, as if yanked from a long dream. He managed a weak smile, one that felt a little forced now. Not yet, Ethan," he replied, his voice rougher than it had been that morning. "But she'll be here soon. Maybe her flight's delayed. That happens all the time, right?" Ethan nodded, but inside the answer didn't sit right. 4 days was far too long for a simple delay, especially since Henry hadn't once left his seat to check the board Ethan had pointed out earlier. He slid into the chair beside Henry, leaving enough space so the old man wouldn't feel crowded. "Have you eaten anything?" Ethan asked, his eyes dropping to Henry's trembling hands. Henry shook his head, brushing the bouquet lightly as if to hide his unease. "I'm not hungry. I just want to be here for Isabella. What if I step away and she arrives?" Ethan frowned, searching for a way to respond without hurting him. "But it's been 4 days. You need a break, at least some food. I could grab you water or a sandwich. It'd only take a minute." Henry met his gaze, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, but he shook his head again. "Thank you, Ethan. You're a good kid. But I'm fine. I've waited longer than this before. A few more hours are nothing." Henry's words silenced Ethan for a moment. He recalled the story from that morning. Days as a pilot in the war, waiting through brutal snowstorms to keep his crew alive. Maybe that kind of patience was carved into his bones, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wait was different. It wasn't war, it wasn't survival, it was just a woman, Isabella, who Henry believed would walk through that exit. Ethan glanced at the digital board down the hall. Flight 419, the one Henry had mentioned, had landed 2 days ago, according to the schedule he'd checked on his lunch break. So why was Henry still here? "Mr. Henry," Ethan started, his voice cautious, "are you sure Isabella's coming today? I mean, have you talked to her? A call, a text, anything?" Henry hesitated, his grip tightening on the bouquet, a few more petals drifting to the floor. I'm not great with technology," he admitted, his voice shrinking, "but she messaged me last week, said she'd come on flight 419. Maybe I got the day wrong, or something held her up over there. She's far away, you know." Ethan nodded, but his mind churned with questions. If she messaged last week, why hadn't Henry double-checked? Why hadn't he called her? And if the flight had already arrived, where was she? Ethan stood, pretending to resume his patrol, but really he just needed space to think. As he left the hall, Henry's silhouette lingered in his mind. An old man with dying flowers, frozen amid an indifferent crowd. On the drive home that night, with streetlights flickering through his car window, Ethan couldn't stop replaying it all. He told himself it might be a mix-up, a delayed flight, a missed message. But little details gnawed at him, like stray puzzle pieces. The dusty travel pillow, had Henry planned for such a long wait? The roses, why not replace them after 4 days? And the way he dodged specifics about Isabella, as if clinging to a dream more than a fact. When Ethan reached his small apartment, the hum of traffic seeped through the open window. He slumped at the kitchen table, shoving aside a plate of cold leftovers, his thoughts still spinning. He scrolled through social media on his phone, but nothing could erase Henry's image. He thought of his grandma, how she'd lived alone in her final years, recounting old stories with a faraway look. Was Henry trapped in the past too, holding on to a hope that wasn't real? Ethan shook his head, pushing the idea away. Henry wasn't a drifter, his clothes were too neat, his demeanor too composed. But if not that, then what was keeping him at the airport for 4 days? As he lay in bed, darkness swallowing the room, Ethan couldn't sleep. The vision of Henry on that chair, wilted roses in hand, looped in his mind like an endless film reel. What if Isabella never came? Would Henry sit there forever, waiting for a ghost? The thought twisted his stomach. He punched his pillow, telling himself he was overthinking it. But deep down, Ethan knew Henry had struck a chord, a part of him that ached for the lonely, for dreams left behind. As the moonlight faded outside, Ethan made a silent vow. Tomorrow he'd dig deeper. Not just out of curiosity, but because he felt he owed Henry an answer, even if it was one the old man might not want to hear. Day 5 at Silverwind Airport dawned with a sluggish haze. The early sun rays streamed through the massive glass panes, casting a faint glow across the marble floor, but they couldn't chase away the morning's chill. Ethan Carter arrived earlier than usual, his security boots echoing with crisp, determined steps as he entered the arrivals hall. He'd barely slept the night before. Henry Grayson, the old man with the wilted roses, haunted him like a wordless riddle. 4 days of waiting was already too much, and Ethan knew that if Henry was still there, he couldn't keep standing on the sidelines. He needed answers, not just for himself, but for Henry too. As Ethan stepped into the hall, he wasn't surprised to see Henry still perched on that familiar chair. But today's sight tightened his chest. The bouquet in Henry's hands was reduced to a skeletal cluster of stems, nearly all the petals gone, leaving just a few crimson scraps clinging like old wounds. His cream wool coat hung loose and disheveled, his brown leather shoes dulled by a thin layer of dust, and the small travel pillow beside him looked abandoned, forgotten in time. But what stopped Ethan cold was Henry's eyes, pale blue and deep, now clouded with exhaustion. The fiery hope from days past had nearly flickered out, replaced by an empty, aching longing. Ethan took a deep breath and approached. "Mr. Henry," he called, his voice low and gentle, as if afraid to shatter the fragile air around the old man. Henry looked up, his thin lips curving into a faint smile, but it lacked the life it once held. "Ethan, you're back," he said, his voice hoarse and rough, like his throat had dried out from days of silence. "I'm still okay. Isabella's coming soon, I know it." Ethan sat beside him, closer this time, close enough to hear the faint rasp of Henry's breathing. "You've been here over 4 days," he said, his tone a mix of care and probing. "Aren't you tired? You need food, rest. I'm worried about you." Henry shook his head, his hands tightening around the bouquet like it was a lifeline. "I can't leave, Ethan. If I go, what if Isabella arrives? I promised I'd wait for her." Ethan nodded, but inside the doubts from yesterday swelled into a tidal wave. He decided to push further. "Mr. Henry, can you tell me more about Isabella? I want to understand her, why you're so patient." Henry hesitated, his gaze flicking to the exit once more before settling back on Ethan. Finally, he sighed, as if unlocking a door to a memory he'd kept sealed for too long. "Her name's Isabella," Henry began, his voice trembling but thick with emotion. "I met her 60 years ago, during the war. I was a pilot. She was a nurse in a field hospital. She was beautiful, Ethan, like sunshine in the darkest days. I promised I'd come back for her with a bouquet of roses, but the war tore us apart. I thought I'd lost her forever." Ethan listened, his heart clenching at the story. But then Henry went on, and the next words made him freeze. "Then 2 years ago, I got a message from her online. She said she's living far away, Africa, I think, and now she wants to see me again. She's sick, Ethan, real sick. I have to be here to meet her, to help her. Ethan's brows furrowed, but he kept his face calm. "Real sick?" he echoed, his voice soft but laced with doubt. Henry nodded, his eyes glinting with a mix of hope and pain. "Cancer. She needs money for treatment and to get here. I sent her some, not much, but enough to start her trip. And I brought the rest." He gestured to the small suitcase beside him, his voice quivering. $25,000. Everything I've got. I want her to live, Ethan. I can't lose her again." Henry's words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. $25,000. That staggering amount, paired with talk of online messages and a serious illness, set off alarm bells screaming in his head. He fought to keep his voice steady, but his heart pounded. "You're carrying $25,000 in cash?" he asked, glancing at the worn suitcase. Henry nodded, his expression heartbreakingly innocent. "Yes. Isabella said she'd need it right away for treatment when she arrives. I have to be ready." A chill raced down Ethan's spine. This wasn't a timeless love story anymore. It felt like a trap. He took a deep breath, searching for a gentle way forward without wounding the old man. "Mr. Henry, how did you send her the money?" "Through a bank." Henry shook his head, his bony fingers brushing the suitcase. "No, some app. I'm not good with it, but she guided me. She said last week her flight had issues, needed more to fix the ticket. I sent another 5,000. She promised she'd come right after." Ethan's mind reeled. Money sent via an app, flight troubles, and now $25,000 in cash. It all screamed scam, the kind he'd been trained to spot. But looking into Henry's trusting eyes, he couldn't bear to shatter his hope just yet. "Do you have a picture of Isabella?" Ethan asked, hoping for a clue. Henry smiled, pulling an old, cracked screen phone from his coat pocket. He fumbled with it, then handed it to Ethan, showing a photo. It was an older woman, silver hair, a gentle smile, warm eyes. "This is her," Henry said, his voice brimming with pride. "She sent me this last year. Beautiful, right?" Ethan nodded, but his doubts deepened. The photo looked real, but it could have been lifted from anywhere online. He handed the phone back, keeping his tone even. "She is beautiful, Mr. Henry. But are you sure she's coming today? You've been here over 4 days." Henry nodded firmly, though a flicker of worry crossed his eyes. "I'm sure. She messaged me this morning, said she's boarded the plane. She'll be here any minute." Ethan nodded, but in his head the pieces clicked together. A message this morning, a huge sum of money, a love story too perfect to be true. It was all too convenient. He stood, patting Henry's shoulder lightly. "I'll be right back, Mr. Henry. Just grabbing you some water. Don't go anywhere, okay?" Henry smiled, nodding. "Thank you, Ethan. You're a good man." As Ethan walked away, his heart sank heavy as stone. He didn't want to believe Henry was being scammed, but every sign pointed that way. This old man, a pilot who'd survived war, a soul full of love, might have fallen prey to a cruel con. Ethan clenched his fists, resolve flaring inside him. He wouldn't let Henry lose everything. No matter how painful the truth, he had to protect him, from the scammers and from the heartbreak of a shattered dream. Glancing back one last time, he saw Henry still sitting there, eyes fixed on the exit, the wilted roses in his hands like a silent, unanswered prayer. Dusk settled over Silverwind Airport, the last golden-orange rays of the day spilling through the giant glass panes, bathing the arrivals hall in a warm but weary glow. Ethan Carter stood a few meters from Henry Grayson's chair, clutching a water bottle he'd grabbed from the coffee stand, but his feet froze mid-step. The old man was still there, a fixed part of the scene, the rose bouquet now just brittle stems, petals scattered around the chair's base like fragments of shattered memories. The small suitcase holding $25,000 sat silently beside him, and Henry's pale blue eyes, though exhausted, remained locked on the exit with a frail glimmer of hope. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself to return and talk, but a faint sound sliced through his thoughts, the chime of a text message from the cracked old phone in Henry's hands. Henry flinched, his trembling fingers fumbling to unlock it. His eyes lit up, a rare radiant smile breaking across his wrinkled face. "Ethan," he exclaimed, his voice cracking with excitement, "she's here. Isabella just texted me. She says she's landed. She'll be out in 10 minutes. She told me to bring the money. She needs it right away for treatment." Ethan froze, the water bottle nearly slipping from his grip. Henry's words jolted through him like a shockwave, igniting every doubt he'd tried to suppress since morning. 10 minutes, $25,000 in cash. A perfectly timed message. The scattered pieces in his mind snapped into a clear and terrifying picture. He stepped closer, forcing his voice to stay calm despite his pounding heart. "Mr. Henry, can I see the message?" he asked, sitting beside the old man. Henry nodded eagerly, handing over the phone with uncontained joy. "Here, look, she's really here. I knew it." Ethan took the device, its cracked screen displaying a brief text. "Henry, I just landed. Meet me at the exit in 10 minutes. Don't forget the money. I need it now. Love you, Isabella." The words were sweet, but to Ethan they felt icy, like a veiled threat. He glanced at Henry, the old man beaming, clutching the suitcase as if ready to leap up, and felt his heart sink. Henry didn't know, he couldn't know that this wasn't Isabella, but the final snare of a ruthless scam. Ethan drew a sharp breath, a decision locking into place in an instant. He couldn't let Henry walk into this trap. "Mr. Henry," he said, his tone firm yet gentle, "I need you to trust me for a minute. I'm going to hold on to your phone, and I need you to stay right here. Don't go anywhere. I'll explain soon, but you have to follow me on this, okay?" Henry frowned, his excitement fading into confusion. "But Isabella's waiting. I have to go, don't I?" Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder, his gaze steady. "I know you want to see her, but trust me. Just 10 minutes. I promise I'll clear it all up." Henry stared at him, those pale blue eyes flickering with uncertainty, but he finally nodded, though he clearly didn't grasp what was happening. Ethan stood, clutching Henry's phone, and strode quickly to a secluded corner near the info desk. He yanked the radio from his belt, his voice low and urgent. "Alpha Team, this is Carter. Emergency in the arrivals hall. Suspected financial scam targeting an elderly man. I need backup now. Discreet, plain clothes. 2 suspects might show in 10 minutes. Move fast." A clipped response crackled back. "Copy that. Team's on the way." Ethan glanced back at Henry from a distance. The old man sat there, cradling the wilted bouquet, his eyes fixed on the exit with a mix of joy and unease. A surge of anger flared in Ethan, not at Henry, but at the faceless predators exploiting his trust. This man, a pilot who'd survived war, a soul brimming with love, was now prey to heartless schemers. Ethan clenched his fists, resolve blazing inside him. No matter how brutal the truth, he wouldn't let Henry lose everything. Not just the money, but the last shred of faith in a love he'd held onto for 60 years. Within minutes, his team trickled in. They wore plain clothes, casual jackets, jeans, blending into the crowd like ordinary travelers. Ethan spotted Anna Reed, his close colleague, near the gate, pretending to scroll her phone while her sharp eyes scanned every face. 2 others, Liam and Sophie, took up positions at opposite ends of the hall, hands poised under their jackets. Ethan caught Anna's eye and nodded. She returned a subtle nod, signaling the team was ready. He walked back to Henry, sitting beside him again, the water bottle still gripped tight as a flimsy excuse. "Ethan, what's going on?" Henry asked, his voice trembling, his eyes betraying growing panic. "Isabella's almost here. Why do you look so tense?" Ethan forced a smile, setting the bottle on the chair. "Just a security check, Mr. Henry. I want to make sure everything's safe when Isabella arrives. Stay here. I've got it handled." Henry nodded, though doubt lingered in his expression. Ethan's gut twisted. He hated lying to him, but the truth couldn't come yet. Not until the culprits showed themselves. Time crawled by, each second stretching into an eternity. Ethan kept his composure, but his fingers dug into the chair's edge, his eyes locked on the exit. Henry fidgeted, brushing the suitcase and muttering, "She's almost here. I need to be ready." Ethan patted his shoulder, his voice soothing. "Just a little longer, Mr. Henry. I'm right here with you." But inside, every nerve was taut as a wire. If he was right, the scammers would appear soon, not Isabella, but thieves coming to claim their final prize from this trusting old man. Then, from the parking lot entrance, Ethan caught movement. Two men stepped in, black jackets, baseball caps pulled low over their faces. They moved slowly, their eyes sweeping the crowd with cautious intent. When their gazes landed on Henry, the old man with the wilted flowers and suitcase, Ethan's pulse spiked. The men exchanged a quick glance, a subtle nod, and started toward the chair. Ethan whispered into his radio, his voice cold as steel. "They're here. Move in when they get closer." No risk to him. Henry, oblivious, brightened, staring at the exit. "Ethan, I think I see her," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. He stood, hand on Henry's shoulder, ready to shield him at all costs. His team was in place, the trap set. In mere seconds, the truth would unravel, and it might break this old man's heart forever. Silverwind Airport sank into the fading twilight, the last rays of the day streaking the marble floor with long mottled orange bands. The arrivals hall grew quieter, filled only with the faint clatter of a few suitcases and the murmurs of lingering passengers. Ethan Carter stood beside Henry Grayson, his hand resting lightly on the old man's shoulder, his eyes locked on the two men closing in. Dressed in black jackets with baseball caps pulled low, they moved with slow, deliberate steps, their intent unmistakable. When their gazes settled on Henry, the old man with his wilted bouquet and small suitcase, Ethan felt adrenaline surge through his veins. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the moment his suspicions would either be confirmed or shattered. Henry remained oblivious, his pale blue eyes lighting up as he stared toward the exit. "Ethan, I think I see her," he said, his voice trembling with excitement, his hands gripping the suitcase as if ready to stand. But Ethan didn't respond. He muttered into his radio, voice low and razor sharp, "They're here. 2 targets, black jackets, caps, approaching from the parking lot. Move in when they get closer, no risk to him." A clipped reply crackled back. "Copy, Carter." "Team's ready." From the corner of his eye, Ethan tracked his team's movements. Anna Reed, his trusted colleague, lingered near the exit, pretending to fiddle with her phone, but her hand hovered under her jacket. Liam, tall and stoic, stood by the info desk, eyes scanning the crowd. Sophie, petite but swift, blended into a cluster of passengers poised to strike. They melted into the scene like ghosts, but Ethan knew each one was a pro. He flicked his gaze to Anna. She gave a subtle nod. The trap was set tight. He turned back to Henry, forcing calm into his expression despite his racing pulse. "Mr. Henry, stay put, okay?" he said, his tone steady. "Everything's going to be fine." The men were now just 10 meters away. Ethan caught a chilling detail. The taller one wore a silver necklace with a star pendant, identical to what Henry had described from his memories of Isabella, a gift he'd given her 60 years ago. Henry noticed too, his eyes blazing with recognition. "Ethan, look, that guy's wearing Isabella's necklace. She sent them to get me." He sprang up, clutching the suitcase, his voice quaking with joy. Ethan instantly grabbed his shoulder, his tone firm. "Mr. Henry, sit down, don't move." Henry blinked, stunned, but the resolve in Ethan's eyes made him falter, sinking back into the chair, clearly bewildered. The gap closed to 5 meters. The men swapped a quick glance, a subtle nod confirming their target. The shorter one smirked, hand slipping into his jacket pocket, while the taller one quickened his pace, eyes fixed on Henry's suitcase. Cold sweat trickled down Ethan's spine. He didn't know what they carried, knife, gun, or just a phone, but he couldn't take chances. "Now!" he barked into the radio, lunging in front of Henry like a human shield. The arrivals hall erupted into controlled chaos. Anna Reed charged from the exit, landing a precise kick to the shorter man's leg, sending him crashing down. His hand yanked out a small object, not a weapon, but a phone that skidded across the floor. Liam and Sophie closed in from both sides, cutting off the taller man's escape. He spun to flee, but Liam seized his collar, slamming him to the ground in one swift move. "Don't move," Anna shouted, her voice slicing through the noise as she pulled cuffs from under her jacket. Ethan stood firm in front of Henry, bellowing, "Airport security! Hands up on your knees, now!" The crowd flinched. Some yelped, others stumbled back, forming a loose ring around the scene. A few passengers whipped out phones, flashes popping in the tense air. The two men, realizing they were surrounded, slowly raised their hands, their faces shifting from cocky to panicked. Anna cuffed the shorter one, while Liam and Sophie secured the taller one, the metallic clink of handcuffs ringing out in the suddenly.
Silverwind Airport slowly regained its usual rhythm after the brief storm of chaos. The metallic clink of handcuffs had faded, and the two men in black jackets were escorted out to a police car, leaving the arrivals hall steeped in a heavy silence. The twilight glow dimmed beyond the massive glass panes, casting the marble floor in the last faint streaks of orange, as if trying to soothe the shattered scene. Ethan Carter stood beside Henry Grayson, his hand still resting on the old man's shoulder, his gaze fixed on the wrinkled face now pale with shock. The wilted rose bouquet lay silently on the floor, its final petal dropping like a quiet farewell, and the suitcase holding $25,000. Henry's last thread of hope sat there like an abandoned relic. Henry slumped in his chair, his trembling hands hanging limp, his wide eyes staring into nothingness. The airport's hum, rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, seemed unable to reach him anymore. "Ethan?" he whispered, his voice frail as a breeze through a broken window. "What just happened? Where's Isabella? Who were they?" Ethan knelt before him, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He'd known this moment was coming, but nothing could prepare him for the pain Henry was about to face. He took a deep breath, grasping Henry's cold, bony hand in his own. "Mr. Henry," he began, his voice low and tender, "I'm so sorry. Isabella isn't coming. Those men, they weren't her friends. They came to take your money. It was a scam." Henry shook his head slowly, as if refusing to let the words sink in. "No," he stammered, tears welling in his misty blue eyes. "That can't be. Isabella texted me. She said she'd landed. She loves me, Ethan. She needs me." His voice broke, a choked sob escaping his parched throat. Ethan squeezed his hand tighter, fighting to keep his own voice steady. "I know you believed in her, Mr. Henry. I know you love her. But it wasn't the real Isabella. These people pretended to be her, used your memories to trick you. That necklace, they got the details from you to make it look real. I'm so sorry." Henry stared at him, then down at the wilted bouquet on the floor, his face crumpling as reality crashed over him like a merciless wave. He pressed his hands to his face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "No, no. I waited for her. 60 years, he murmured, his voice fading amid the tears. "I thought I'd found her again. I thought she'd forgiven me." Ethan sat beside him, saying nothing more, just letting the pain pour out. His chest ached, not because he couldn't stop the scam, but because he couldn't shield Henry from this deeper loss, one far greater than the $25,000 in that suitcase. From a distance, Anna Reed approached, holding the scammer's phone and the small notebook the team had seized. She handed them to Ethan, her voice soft. Here's the proof. They'd been stalking him for a while. The messages, the photo, all fake. Ethan nodded, flipping open the notebook. Pages scribbled with details about Henry, his birth date, war memories, Isabella's love for roses, even the story of his 60-year-old promise. The phone revealed a string of fabricated texts from Isabella, carefully worded to pierce the old man's heart. Henry, I miss you. I need you to save me. Bring the money and we'll be together forever. Ethan gripped the notebook, anger surging inside him. This wasn't just a scam. It was a cold-blooded game with a man's emotions, a man who'd spent his life loving and waiting. He turned back to Henry, setting the notebook on the chair beside him. Mr. Henry, he said, his voice steady but firm. This is what they did. They weren't Isabella. They didn't know her. But I know you loved the real Isabella, the one in your memories, and that love is real. No one can take that away. Henry looked up, his red-rimmed eyes meeting Ethan's, tears streaming down his cheeks. But I believed. I sent her money. I thought I could save her. He covered his face again, his cries turning to unrestrained sobs. Ethan's heart splintered. He remembered Henry's story. Isabella, the wartime nurse, the promise of roses he couldn't keep. Henry had carried that guilt for 60 years, and when he thought he'd gotten a chance at redemption, it turned into a cruel hoax. It's not your fault, Ethan said, his voice resolute. You're a good man, Mr. Henry. You believed in love, in kindness. They exploited that. But you're not foolish. You just have a heart too big. Henry shook his head, his voice faint. I was foolish, Ethan. I dreamed like a kid. I should have known. Ethan gripped his hand tighter, his gaze unwavering. No, you're not foolish. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You survived a war, kept love alive in your heart for 60 years. They're the cowards, living off others' pain. You didn't lose, Mr. Henry. You're still you. Henry looked at him, a faint spark flickering in his clouded eyes. Though the pain lingered, Ethan's words seemed to touch something deep within, offering a sliver of comfort amid the wreckage of his hope. Ethan picked up the wilted bouquet from the floor, placing it in Henry's hands. This is your love, he said gently. Not what they made up, but what you've held in your heart. The real Isabella, the one you loved, is still there. Henry took the flowers, his trembling fingers brushing the brittle stems, tears falling again. Thank you, Ethan, he whispered, his voice choked. You saved me, not just from them, but from myself. Ethan gave a sad smile, patting his shoulder. I just did what's right, Mr. Henry, and I won't leave you alone. We'll get through this together. The crowd had dispersed, the airport slipping back into its everyday hum, but Ethan and Henry remained, locked in their own quiet space. Henry clutched the wilted bouquet to his chest, his sorrowful eyes fixed on the now empty exit. Ethan sat beside him, silent but steadfast, knowing the road ahead would be long. Not just to recover the money, but to mend this old man's broken heart. Though the truth had been laid bare, though the pain still lingered, Ethan believed Henry would find light again, not from a fake Isabella, but from the goodness he'd given, now returned through Ethan's presence.
Night fell over Silverwind Airport, the cold white glow of fluorescent lights replacing the faded dusk, casting a weary stillness over the arrivals hall. The clatter of suitcases and footsteps dwindled, leaving an empty expanse as if the world had moved on, abandoning Ethan Carter and Henry Grayson to their quiet vigil on the frigid metal chair. The wilted rose bouquet rested in Henry's hands, its brittle stems no longer shedding petals, as if they'd exhausted both life and pain. The suitcase with $25,000, once Henry's final shred of hope, sat motionless by the chair's leg, now just a hollow object, a reminder of a dream dashed to pieces. Henry sat still, clutching the bouquet to his chest, his red-rimmed blue eyes staring into the void. The tears had stopped, but his face bore a deep sorrow, the wrinkles etched sharper under the harsh lights, marking the loss that had just struck. Ethan sat beside him, silent yet close, his hand resting lightly on the old man's shoulder. A wordless vow, he'd just watched Henry crumble as the truth unraveled. The Isabella he'd waited for wasn't real, the love he'd trusted just a cruel act by scammers. But now, with the emotional storm subsided, Ethan knew Henry needed more than truth. He needed a way out of the darkness engulfing his soul. "Ethan," Henry spoke, his raspy, fragile voice breaking the stillness between them. "You must think I'm a fool, don't you? An old man chasing dreams, believing in things that aren't real." Ethan shook his head instantly, his gaze steady on Henry. "No, Mr. Henry," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're not a fool. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You survived a war, kept love alive in your heart for 60 years, and even when you were tricked, you chose to believe in something good. That's not foolishness. That's strength." Henry gave a faint, sad smile, tinged with doubt. "Strength? What strength? I've lost everything. My money, my hope, my faith in myself." Ethan took Henry's hand, the old man's cold, bony fingers cradled in his palm. "You haven't lost everything, Mr. Henry," he said, his tone gentle yet compelling. "Money can be earned back, but the love you have for Isabella, the real Isabella in your memories, no one can take that away. And you're not alone. I'm here with you. We'll get through this together." Henry looked up, his misty eyes searching Ethan's face as if seeking a flicker of light in the thick night. "Why do you care about an old man like me?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You're young, with a whole life ahead. I've got nothing left to give you." Ethan smiled, a sad, warm smile. "Because you remind me of my grandma," he replied, his voice dipping as memories flooded back. "She lived alone in her last years, always talking about the old days with that faraway look. I wasn't there for her enough, and I've regretted it ever since. When I met you, I saw that same loneliness, but also the kindness and resilience she had. I don't want you to face this alone, Mr. Henry. You deserve someone by your side." Henry stared at him, tears spilling down his cheeks again, but this time they weren't just pain. There was a trace of comfort, a warmth from Ethan's heartfelt words. Ethan pulled a small business card from his pocket, pressing it into Henry's hand. "This is my number," he said softly. "Call me any time, day or night. If you need to talk, need help, or just need someone to listen. I mean it, Mr. Henry." Henry took the card, his trembling fingers tracing the text as if it were a treasure. "Thank you, Ethan," he whispered, his voice choked. "You've done so much already. I don't know how to repay you." Ethan cut him off, shaking his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just want you safe, and I want you to know there are still good people out there. Not everyone's like those guys." Henry nodded slowly, a faint glow sparking in his eyes as he looked at Ethan. "You know," he said, his voice softening into a memory, "I used to think this world had changed too much. That young folks like you didn't care about old relics like me, but you proved me wrong. There's still kindness out there, isn't there?" Ethan smiled, patting his shoulder. "Plenty of it, Mr. Henry, in every generation. We just need to see each other, help each other a little, and I won't let you lose faith in that." Ethan stood, offering his hand to help Henry up. "Come on, Mr. Henry," he said gently. "I'll take you home. We can stop for food on the way if you'd like, or just sit quietly if that's what you need. Your choice." Henry looked at Ethan's hand, then rose shakily, steadied by Ethan's grip. He pressed the wilted bouquet to his chest, the suitcase now in Ethan's hand, and together they left the arrivals hall. The night outside enveloped them, but the streetlights twinkled like tiny stars, guiding them through the dark. As they stepped away from the airport, Ethan wasn't just taking Henry to a house, he was leading him toward a new beginning. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There'd be legal steps to recover the money, days when Henry would wrestle with pain and loss. But Ethan also knew Henry wasn't alone anymore. A spark of an idea flickered in his mind, a surprise he wanted to give Henry, a way to bring real light after this nightmare. He recalled Henry's story about Isabella, the promise from 60 years ago. Maybe, he thought, I could trace her. Not the imposter, but the real Isabella from Henry's past. Whether she'd passed or still lived, even a small clue could be the greatest gift he could offer. As they reached the parking lot, Henry turned to Ethan, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You're my miracle, Ethan," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "I never thought I'd find someone like you in all this mess." Ethan chuckled, helping him into the car. "I'm no miracle, Mr. Henry. I'm just a guy who wants to help you find one. And we will, I promise." The car rolled away from the airport, Silverwind's lights fading into the distance. Ethan knew this wasn't the end, but the start of another journey, a journey of healing, of rebuilding trust. From a security guard doing his job, he'd become a friend, a lifeline for Henry. And in his heart, he believed this old man, with his wilted roses and undying love, would find light again, even if just a small glimmer amid the shadows of these past days. The night-cloaked Silverwind Airport, as Ethan Carter pulled out of the parking lot, his headlights slicing through the darkness like fragile blades. Beside him, Henry Grayson sat silently in the passenger seat, the wilted rose bouquet pressed to his chest, his frail hands trembling as they brushed the dry stems, clinging to the last remnants of a dream that had just shattered. The suitcase with $25,000 rested in the back, no longer a symbol of hope, but a quiet reminder of the deception he'd endured. The road stretched ahead, streetlights flickering like lost stars, guiding them through the night. Not just the physical darkness, but the lingering pain still heavy in Henry's heart. Ethan glanced at Henry, the old man's wrinkled face illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard, his pale blue eyes clouded with exhaustion and dried tears. He hadn't spoken since leaving the airport, just sat there, his gaze distant, lost in a world Ethan couldn't reach. Ethan knew Henry was wrestling within, grappling with the loss of a fake Isabella, the collapse of his trust, and the loneliness he'd carried for 60 years. Gripping the steering wheel tighter, Ethan's chest felt heavy. He'd stopped the scammers, saved Henry's money, but he couldn't shield him from the ache tearing at his soul. All he could do now was stay close, offering a spark of light in that darkness. "Mr. Henry," Ethan said, his voice low and gentle, breaking the silence in the car. "Want to stop for something to eat? There's a little place around the corner, makes great sandwiches. Or I can take you straight home if you'd rather rest." Henry turned to him, his eyes flickering with a hint of confusion, as if pulled from a deep thought. He gave a faint, sad smile, tinged with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan," he replied, his voice hoarse. "I'm not hungry. I just want to get home. I'm so tired." Ethan nodded, not pressing further. He understood Henry's fatigue wasn't just from 4 days at the airport. It was the weight of a lifetime's hope crumbling in a few short hours. The car rolled through quiet streets, the engine's hum a soft, steady backdrop. Ethan glanced at Henry again, watching him clutch the bouquet tighter, as if it were his last anchor. "Mr. Henry," he said gently, "I know you feel empty right now, but I want you to know you're not alone. I'll be here, not just today, but in the days ahead. We'll get through this together." Henry looked up, his misty eyes meeting Ethan's, searching for a glimmer in those words. "You don't have to do that, Ethan," he whispered. "You saved me from them. Don't waste your time on an old man like me." Ethan shook his head, his gaze resolute. "It's not a waste of time, Mr. Henry. You remind me of my grandma, someone I didn't support enough when she needed me. I won't make that mistake again. You don't have to face this alone. I'm here, not just as a security guard, but as a friend." Henry fell silent, tears tracing down his cheeks again. But this time, they weren't only pain, there was a warmth from Ethan's sincerity. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked. "You don't know what that means to me. I thought I'd lost everything. But with you here, I feel like I still have something." Ethan smiled, patting his shoulder. "You've still got a lot, Mr. Henry. You have the biggest heart I've ever seen. Big enough to love someone for 60 years. Big enough to believe in goodness even after being deceived. That's something no one can take away." Henry nodded slowly, brushing the bouquet, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You sound like a young pilot I once knew," he said, his voice softening into a memory. "Back then I thought I could do anything, fly through gunfire, keep my promise to Isabella. Now I'm just an old man with wilted flowers." "You're not just an old man with wilted flowers," Ethan interjected, his tone firm. "You're Henry Grayson, a pilot who survived war, a man who kept love alive for a lifetime. These flowers aren't wilted, they're proof of that. And I'll help you find light again, I promise." Henry looked at him, a small spark igniting in his clouded eyes, as if Ethan's words had reached a hidden corner of his soul. "You're a good kid, Ethan," he said, his voice warmer. "I never thought I'd find someone like you in all this mess." The car pulled up to a modest house on the outskirts, its porch light casting a faint glow. Ethan stepped out, helping Henry from the seat, steadying him as his shaky legs hit the ground. He grabbed the suitcase and guided Henry inside. The house was small but cozy, walls lined with old photos, Henry young in his pilot's uniform, a dark-haired girl beaming beside him. Ethan knew it had to be the real Isabella, not the imposter, but the woman from Henry's past. He set the suitcase down, turning to him. "Rest up, okay?" he said. "I'll come back tomorrow. We'll sort out the money, file the report, whatever you need. I'm not going anywhere." Henry sank into an armchair, the bouquet still in his hands, looking at Ethan with gratitude-filled eyes. "Thank you, Ethan," he said, his voice trembling. "You've given me a reason to keep going. I don't know what I'd do without you." Ethan smiled, patting his shoulder. "You don't have to do anything alone anymore. I'm here. Sleep well, Mr. Henry." He headed to the door, but glanced back one last time. Henry sat there, clutching the flowers, eyes closing as if seeking peace after the storm. Driving home through silent streets, Ethan's mind buzzed with thoughts. He knew this wasn't the end. Tough days lay ahead, legal processes, nights when Henry would face his loneliness. But he also knew he'd changed, from a security guard doing his duty to a friend, a lifeline for this old man. An idea sparked in his mind, tracking down the real Isabella, not to bring her back, but to give Henry a final gift, a connection to the past he cherished. A letter, a memento, or a story from someone who knew her could be the light he wanted to offer. Back at his place, Ethan sat at the table, staring at the business card he'd given Henry. He smiled, knowing he'd saved Henry not just from scammers, but from his own despair. Henry Grayson, with his wilted roses and timeless love, had changed him, and Ethan wouldn't let him walk this path alone. Outside, the night softened as dawn crept in, whispering a promise of a new day, for Ethan and for Henry too. Hey everyone, that's the end of Ethan and Henry's story, for now, but their journey's far from over. What do you think of this unexpected friendship? Did Ethan's kindness hit you right in the feels? Drop a comment below. Do you believe Henry will find his faith again? Or could the real Isabella show up somehow? Hit that like button if Henry's Wilted Roses moved you, and subscribe so you don't miss more heartfelt stories like this. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever met an Ethan in real life? Comment now and let's spread some goodness together, just like he did for Henry.